Dia biasa merawat yang setelah sakit nanti merawat kalau yang
jadi lembaga menurut jadi berapa lama? Ini yang apa? Oh ya, juga kok. Macet ya, iya. Dari mana? Sekarang dari mana? Loh kok Erasmus? Bukan, Menteng Bristol. Kita di Cikini, Mbak. Kita di Cikini Raya. Di Cikini Raya kita itu. Kok Erasmus? Ya, oh iya. Di sebelahnya cepat ganti. Ya, ini Menteng. Di sebelahnya cepat ganti di bagian. Makasih.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning everybody. This master saya Enrique from SMERU. First of all, I would like to thank you all for coming today to SMERU. Today we have a long time friend who is visiting us now, Enrique Mendizabal. more popularly known as TK. Today we will have a discussion, an interactive one, not a seminar where we give a presentation for 30 minutes and question and answer, but it's more like an informal and more interactive discussion between all of us here. I hope that what will happen today. But before we start, let me introduce some of his profile. First, Enrique Mendizabal lives between London and Lima. That's impressive. I live and work between Bogor and Jakarta. not a comparison there. Cikini is an independent researcher and advisor to think tank and policy research networks in developing countries mostly. He has been working and studying think tank for over a decade now. In 2010, he founded the blog on think tanks. I think it's quite famous. And I expect everybody knows that this blog. It now has become one of the leading sources of information, analysis, and opinion relating to think tanks. More recently, IK has been working with researchers, policy entrepreneurs, and philanthropists to set up new think tanks, focusing on democracy in Latin America, forestry in Peru, and also on politics and ideas. His formal position now is the director of Mendizabal Ltd. But before that, he was the head of the research and policy in development of the RAPID program in the Overseas Development Institute, the ODI, where he was also a research fellow and the fact program leader. We also know Enrique for his work on the evidence-based policy in development network, the EPDDN. I think that's how we get to know him. With carbon networks in Indonesia and several other Southeast Asian countries. Kike has also published several books on the links between think tanks and political parties in Latin America, the relations between think tank and politics in Southeast Asia, and also a series of studies on the relative role of research-based evidence in political debates in Latin America and also in Africa. I think that's my introductions. So now let's start our discussion, and we'll give the first opportunity to explain ideas, and we can respond to these ideas.
Thank you very much. It's very, very kind. As you say, you can find me online. You just search on think tanks, you'll find a lot of the content of the ideas I'll be sharing. It's not always my content, but I try to share work from others as well. Okay, so what I wanted to do today was have a conversation about a couple of issues related to think tanks or policy research institutes that are often left later on in efforts to develop their capacity. Something that people don't tend to want to talk about until much later in a capacity development effort. And think tanks in Indonesia, policy research organizations in Indonesia, are now receiving from the multi-sector initiative, are going to be receiving support. There are going to be probably other initiatives doing the same thing. And I think it's useful to talk about this. And this is about governance and management. Okay, we always talk about communication and influence, the enemy of influence, but the issues of governance and management is left out of many conversations. And in my experience, working with many think tanks around the world, they always come back to haunt us. Eventually, we have to talk about these things. So what I want to do is I want to present to you a number of governance and management issues that I think are very important for think tanks in developing countries, but also generally, and ask you to reply to those ideas that I present to you. You could share an example, you can disagree, you can agree. The idea is that we get as much interaction as we can. I have a 9-page document that I prepared yesterday that I won't read, don't worry. But then I will try to update it with a conversation and then publish it. So it will be online, so you can read it after this event, as well as I think watching the video, which we'll record it. And hopefully this starts a conversation earlier on than it probably will have started if we didn't talk about these things. Yes. So why? So I'm going to be taking breaks and stopping as I talk to give you the chance to come in and interrupt me. So please do so, otherwise it will look very embarrassing sitting here in silence. So why do I think that we don't talk about governance and management as much as we should? Let me suggest two reasons. From the point of view of the think tank or the Policy Research Institute, it's a little bit embarrassing sometimes to tell your funders or other think tanks that we're struggling. I work in a think tank and in several think tanks, and I know that we don't want to be too open about this. Right? Even if we're struggling, even if we're having trouble, we don't want to open up too much because we fear that maybe this will be seen as a reason not to fund us by our usual donors or clients. From the point of view of the donors, especially foreign donors, they find it a little bit uncomfortable getting too close to the detail, the private life of the organization. They don't want to ask think tank, show me your books, or I think this is not working fine. They want to be a bit too respectful. They want to be respectful, but they end up being a bit too respectful about the organization. So partly because of these things, we don't talk about them. But it's important to talk about them because we need to do something about governance and management. And it's important because a lot of the money, a lot of the funds, and a lot of support that goes into these organizations, into think tanks, like SMERU and others, you won't be able to take full advantage of that if you don't address key governance and management issues. So, for example, you might get a lot of training on communications. You might get workshops, you might get tools, toolkits, you might get people coming over, consultants coming over and giving you great ideas. But unless you have a team, a communication team, or even an individual, but in the right place within the organization, so sitting in the right place in relation to the senior management, etc., then those ideas, those tools, that experience won't be wasted entirely, but it won't be applied as you would hope so. You might get poor funding. You might get a lot of new funding to do whatever you want to do, to really think outside of the box. But unless you have the right senior management team, unless you have the right finance team and human resources department, it's very likely that those funds that have been given to you to take the initiative will just go to do more of the same. We'll go into small pet projects from researchers. We'll go into just covering costs, running costs of the organization. They won't lead to real change because the organization is not ready for that. Another thing has to do with sustainability. If you think about sustainability in terms of funding, we give these programs support think tanks to try to improve their capacity to access new funds in the future, or more funds in the future. But really, sustainability is about resilience. It's about having a strong board, strong management, so that they can deal with any shocks in the future, any political shocks, economic shocks, changes in senior staff, sudden changes in senior staff. Sometimes, directors or deputy directors or senior researchers leave all of a sudden, and what happens to the organization? There might be a sudden drop in funding. Will the organization survive if these things happen? And this has less to do with money and more to do with the governance arrangement of the organization and its capacity to manage its assets and its environment. So it's important to look at these things because a very well-funded organization, very visible organization, very popular organization with a weak governance can exist one day and be gone the next day. That's something that we need to be worried about. Okay, so please interrupt me if you have any comments if you disagree with what I say. So I want to talk about 8, but I'm not going to go into too much detail on each one. So I want to suggest 8 issues that are important. You can interrupt me, we can discuss each at a time, or when I'm done, we can get back to it. I'm going to go from top to bottom to describe some of these governance and management issues that I think are important to take into account. And this is not a complete list, and also I know this is my opinion, my informed opinion. So I'm completely open for a discussion.
Can I interrupt? Sure. I think before we start the discussion, it would be a good idea if you explain to us so we have the same understanding on 3 things. One, what you mean by think tank.
Yeah.
Because, for example, SMERU, we like to call ourselves as a policy research institute. Some people have called us the think tank, but some others have argued that think tanks don't do original research. They just collect information and synthesize it to make it available information for users. Secondly, governance. What do you mean by governance here? And its relation with management. Is management part of the governance, or it's a different issue, or you simply refer to governance as the structures of governance within an institution or a think tank. Before you respond, I would like to remind you that we have coffee and tea on the side. Please enjoy it while we have the discussion. I think it will make the discussion more flowing, while we enjoy coffee. And I also forget to mention earlier that Kike has asked us to apply certain house rules in this discussion, meaning that you don't have to identify yourself when you want to say something, but you are welcome if you want to identify.
That's a fair point. I made the point of saying think tanks and policy research institutes because I know that there is a debate. Think tanks, think about think tanks as a label and nothing more than that. And you may choose to use it or not. But think tanks can be organizations that do not do original research, if you want. And they can be organizations that do. It will depend on the countries. Each country will have a different set of boundaries. But I am trying to talk about organizations that undertake research, maybe very much original research, all the way to good analysis, with the objective of trying to influence policy practice. That's a very general description. The governance is doing more the arrangement of the different parts of an organization, the institutions, the rules of how different parts of the organization come together and work together. And the managers do more with the systems, the processes that allow these bits to work in practice. Line management processes, appraisal processes, etc. But also it's a bit of a catch-all term, governance and management, to describe what many organizations consider to be central services. The things that are not necessarily only about doing the research. But please do ask me any questions. Anyway, so the first thing from the top that I wanted to highlight is the importance of boards of directors. Many organizations have different types of boards, and it has to do with the legal status a lot of the time. So some boards are internal boards. They're made up of, they're like a council. They're made up of some of the researchers of the organization, founders of the organization. And some think tanks or policy research institutes have external boards. These are people who legally own the organization. In most cases, unless the think tank or research center is set up as a for-profit, the boards are legally responsible for what the organization does and how it's managed. However, in most cases too, boards tend to be, they don't tend to have the experience or the skills that are necessary to govern an organization like a think tank or a policy research institute. They're either too weak, they've been set up by the directors or the founders, and they're just there to legitimize what the organization wants to do. So, famous people, so they give us a good, give us access to places. Or they're too strong and they get too involved. Often they don't have the right skill set. They're just experts in the field that the think tank is interested in. But think tanks need boards where there's somebody who knows a lot about management, a lot about human resources, a lot about finance, a lot about communications, because these are the kind of things that the directors struggle with and they need help. Where are they going to get help from? They need to get help from their boards. Sometimes the boards they're just not committed. Directors struggle to find them, to get them to come to events, to get them to come to board meetings. So it's a constant struggle, it's a constant fight. I've come up with a few boards that are very, very committed to the think tanks that they govern. So boards are important because they are, they essentially are in charge. They own the organization, and they are responsible for making sure that the organization has the best accepted directors it can. They're in charge of hiring and firing the directors and the senior management. The second level. So I don't know. Maybe I should ask. Does anybody have an impression about the quality of boards or policy research institutes in Indonesia, maybe, or do any of the things I've mentioned, strike a chord? Do you find familiar, or nobody wants to talk about their boards?
Well, okay, you mentioned that the board owned the organization. How do you describe it? Because somehow, I don't know, that the word own the organization. Please explain to us.
Yes, I mean, this is on purpose, I use that word. Legally speaking, who is responsible? In most cases, the boards are responsible for the organization. So when it comes to applying NGO legislation, if you're an NGO, it's the board that is responsible. The chair of the board is legally responsible for the organization. The secretary is a treasury. They are the ones who, if the organization got into trouble, they would be legally responsible. This changes in different countries, so I don't know the details of Indonesian legislation, so I'm not necessarily talking about Indonesian. But having said that, the fact that the boards have that responsibility, rarely they take it up. They are not always that involved, considering that they are legally responsible for it. That's why I mentioned the word owned. It's the equivalent of the shareholders in a corporation. They own the corporation, and if they are interested, they'll get involved. They'll get involved in the way the organization is run.
So, I have a comment on that. I think most think tank in Indonesia has a form of yayasan, the legal body, of foundation. Yeah, and the foundation of law or undang-undang yayasan in Indonesia is basically copied from the US. Quite similar. And in the law, it's actually the board who is responsible for funding, for example, for the yayasan. I think that's the latest gap between the legislation and the ELP, because often because the board was more like outsiders to the organization, even though you say they own, they don't get involved. They don't really know the details of the organization. And the responsibility for many things stated in the legislation actually goes to the ministry.
Yeah. That's a very good point. One of the things I am getting more and more involved in slowly is trying to develop training for boards. I've come across a couple of directors who have said that, as a director, I would like to develop a training program for my board, so my board understands how to be better at governing our organization, so they can take on some of the responsibilities that by law they should be, and not passing them on to me. Or they say, what if I leave? Who's going to manage that transition? And let my board be able to do that. And that's what they should do. So boards are important, and most of the time the funder won't talk to the board, won't talk to the executive directors. And the boards will kind of be left out of the conversation. I'm not suggesting they should be involved in every single detail, that'd be too much. But are we talking to them? Are we involved in them in the reforms that these organizations are going through? And we should, because they are legally, or they are politically, economically, the responsible. The next level is the executive director level. It's usually one person, but in fact, this is a small team. You might involve an executive director, a deputy director, and the executive director's support team, immediate support team, administrators, and huge amount of responsibility falls on the executive directors. You need to manage donors and clients. It's about financial management of the organization. So not the accounting, not the paying invoices, but really financial management, more strategic aspects of finance. Recruitment of senior staff, recruitment of key staff to make the organization competitive. Managing talent, managing those bright minds in the organization. Managing the board, the executive director needs to be constantly engaging with the board. And if we say that the board is slightly weak or unprepared, then that's going to be a big challenge as well. Communications, often the executive directors are the face of the organization. They might say, we're not going to be the face, I'm going to delegate that to my senior researchers, but even then, they have to be very public and very active. These are just some of the responsibilities that executive directors have, and maybe their deputies as well. Unfortunately, very few, and sorry, I'm not suggesting, but very few executive directors, when they start their career in a research center, say to themselves, I want to be a manager of an organization. Most of them wanted to be researchers. Most of them wanted to be academics or wanted to be known for their ideas. So most of the executive directors that come pros would rather be doing research. They're sitting in their office looking at piles of paperwork, and they'd rather be writing a paper or a book or going to an academic conference. So not only are they not necessarily 100% on the job, and I'm not blaming them, but also they didn't prepare for this. They didn't study an MBA. They didn't study and learn and practice the finance aspect of the organization, the admin aspect, the project management, logistics that involves running such a complex organization. An organization with a business model that is quite crazy, really. Think tanks give away their ideas for free, and then they try to charge them. Think tank publishes its ideas, says, have it, take it, use it, copy it, and then they go to funds and say, oh, would you pay me for what I just gave away? This is it's an odd business model. So there's a huge challenge, right? And few directors have those competencies that few CEOs of corporations have. And so there's another area where we need to think hard. How much support are we giving executive directors and their immediate teams to manage an organization that is difficult to manage, extremely hard to manage, and consider that it's unlikely that they have been prepared themselves for long to take on that. Any comments, reactions?
Oh, we can see that in past. Asset heart is always.
So do you think this director of a think tank, do they need more on management skill or on research skill? Which one is more important? And in terms of this director doesn't have this management skill, they can hire the people who are more management.
That's a very good point. So should a director of a think tank have more research skills and management skills? I think it would be strange if a director of a think tank didn't have a research background or an appreciation for research and did not understand research methods. I think they should. But I think they need significantly more management skills. They need to be more an MBA than an academic, than a researcher. Which is not to say that they shouldn't have a connection to research. In some cases, that's not going to be possible because of the type of organization. For instance, many organizations only hire from within their staff or from within their association. So a solution is what you were saying is to have a more academic director who's the face of the organization, the intellectual leader, and hire a CEO, hire a management deputy who runs the show, who has the mandate to make those tough management decisions that require better understanding of governance and management than most of us in the research world or the economics analysis would have. So there are options, I think, but sometimes these options are hard to sell within the organization, and they have to do with the way it's being arranged, the governance structure of the organization. Yes.
About your alternative that we can use, somebody with let's say a more MBA or somebody with more of a management background to manage think tanks. Yeah, I think we can identify individuals like that, but usually individuals like that would prefer to work, let's say, in a business, in a corporate setting, rather than a non-profit setting, because they obviously wouldn't get paid that much, so it would be hard to recruit someone like that.
Yeah, that's always going to be a challenge. How do you attract the best managers, the best finance officers when they get paid more somewhere else? The solution might not be just hiring. The solution might be in preparing young researchers in your organizations. Instead of promising them a career path down the academic line, promise them a career path down the management line. The possibilities to be directors. So it has to do with an organizational change in organizational culture. Has to do with human resources. Has to do with the signal and the think tank community that everybody's looking for these managers as well as for great researchers. But I'm not suggesting in any way that you should not invest in having great researchers in your organization. I'm just saying that a great team of researchers with poor management is going to struggle to live up to their full potential. And I'm not suggesting I have the answers. That's why I think we should be talking about these things early on. The solution for Indonesia will be different, probably, than the solution for Lima or for Peru.
Would it be a good idea to hire a retired CEO from but
That's a very good idea. But also, you could consider having more retired CEOs on the board. So a way of addressing this is to make sure that your boards of directors are not made up only by well academics, people who know about the policy issues you're dealing with, but people who have the experience of running consultancies, running companies, who the director then can go over them and say, look, I'm having trouble with finance, I'm having trouble with human resources. What do you recommend I do? So, you might not be able to hire them, to have them as full members of staff, but you might be able to access that advice for free by including them in your boards. So it's about having the right mix of skills on the board and your advisory boards or your legal boards. So there are many options, and you've got to think about the best way for your organization. And given the funding you have, given the availability of experts, that might be
we had experience with that, but it wasn't so successful because it turned out that retired CEO are still very busy people, yeah? And they don't necessarily commit to non-profit.
I'm not suggesting it's easy. They might need a lot of time to, you might bring them in, convince them that it's interesting, important. There is some literature, not much, on how to engage with boards, how to get them more involved, how to get them more interested. But I think it's worth considering as an option, as a possibility. They might need some training to understand what a think tank is. They might think that they're going to be board members of an NGO, and you have to explain to them that you're not just an NGO, you do other things. So it's going to be hard, but it might be cheaper than trying to hire an expensive manager. And it might save you money in the end, because it might be better managed. So the point I'm trying to make is that executive directors and their teams are crucial for running the organization, and rarely do they have, without naming names, rarely do they have all the skills that they require to run their organizations in the most effective way. And I'm not just saying this about developing countries, I think this is the same in developed countries.
The exception is SMERU director.
I was just about to say that. The second level, or the third level, sorry, is the senior management teams. So supporting the executive director, that usually is a senior management. And in the same way as the board supports the director, big questions, big ideas. The senior management teams are the implementers. The senior management teams are not just there to do whatever the director says, they're there to think through with the director, but it's definitely necessary to implement the strategy, implement the mission of the organization. And there are a number of common challenges that organizations face dealing with S&T, senior management boards. They will be very different in different organizations, so I'm just using the senior management team in general. The composition of the senior management team will be something to talk about. Should you have only senior researchers in it? Should you include a head of operations or a head of finance in the senior management team? should you include whoever's in charge of communications in senior management? What kind of skills do you need to have in that? So some organizations only have researchers in that team. Some only have researchers and operations, finance, management, and comms nowhere to be seen. Some organizations bring communications into the senior management team. That's going to tell you a lot about the organization, because this is the kind of the first tier after the directors. So from there down, you can tell a lot on how the organization is going to be structured. How much emphasis is the organization given research in relation to communications? How much emphasis is it given to central services? And how those bits of the organization are arranged? Well, you'll know a lot from that composition of the senior management team. What are the competencies of that team? You know, are they skilled enough in that role? Do they know how to be senior management? Often you get promoted the same way the directors get promoted because you're senior. You go to the top of your program, you're the most senior researcher on social protection, and then oops, you're now part of the senior management team. What are you responsible for? Are you responsible for implementing the ideas of the director? Are you responsible for developing plans and strategies? That's usually unclear. Are you being paid to do this? A lot of the time, the people involved in these senior management teams are doing this on top of their day-to-day work. They're not being remunerated to do this. So, what I mean is that in theirs, they're told, okay, you need to work 100% of your time as a researcher. When you become a manager, well, maybe it's only 80% of your time as a researcher and 20% as a manager. And when you become a senior manager, you deal with the organization, then that needs to be reflected in the amount of time you're expected to do research, like a lot less. And then one of the other challenges is how does senior management, how does that team communicate with the rest of the organization? Senior management team is supposed to be an enabler. It's supposed to help get things done. But I always find that because of poor communications with the rest of the organization, they actually create a barrier for communication. They just make it harder for the ideas of the technical director or the ideas of the team, that team itself, to spread around the organization. Because they don't know, what should we share, what should be public, what should be private, where do we share? Do we send emails? Do we put it on the intranet? Do we have public internal events like these? That sounds silly, and it sounds like something that you don't need to worry about. But it's incredible how much of an effect this can have on the morale of the staff, for instance. When they think they're having discussions about the future of our organization, and we're not finding out, we don't know what's going on. That doesn't help. So poor communication can undermine whatever success that the senior management team is having in terms of planning and strategy. Anybody comment? Your organizations, in your organizations, do you know who the senior management team members are? Does everybody know? Does anybody who works in an organization you would be able to name all the members of your senior management team? You all know what they do? No reason to answer, but you're laughing in a way that suggests that you don't know what they do. You might not know them all. Okay, so you don't have a senior management team, that's another. But it's an important piece of that governance structure. Because otherwise you end up just having a director or an executive director who manages 20 people, who's in direct link to 10, 20 people, and that's too many. It's impossible to be organized that way. Do you have a senior management team in SMERU?
Yes, we do. We involve our senior researchers and our
division coordinator in this senior management team, but we have not utilized them as much as we should, because, for example, we're supposed to have monthly meeting of senior management team and staff meeting, and I found that cumbersome, so I just had a staff meeting where everybody meets and discuss everything. Only in certain cases I will call a meeting of the senior management team, and they are also always involved in recruitment, for example, in interviewing candidates. We will select the interviewers from the senior management team. We also have field manipulator here from Silvimeter. I'm sure he's a senior management team member at Silvimeter. Maybe you can share your experience.
I came late, so I didn't follow from the beginning. But then, yes, we do have a senior management team. And, well, you can see even in the structure, it's laid out like that. And so, and I think each of us would manage around no more than 6 or 7, which I think is pretty okay. But yeah, so I just came in, so I didn't follow the whole discussion. That's how our situation right now. And I think having the structure and having this not too many people under your responsibilities makes it easier to manage.
But that's an interesting point, because it's not just about the structure that I referred to as the management team, but the members of the senior management team, or that group of people, tend to be the ones who are responsible for internal projects. So if an organization wanted to strengthen its internal communications, or it wanted to strengthen its financial department, or it wanted to carry out internal projects, those internal projects usually are implemented by members of the senior management team. They're not going to be implemented by the researchers who are doing the work. They don't need to be implemented by consultants. And the executive director can implement absolutely everything. So internal projects, if you want to develop a new intranet, if you want to commission a new website, if you want to develop a new training program for your staff, those are internal projects. Those tend to be given, allocated to members of that senior management. That's why the time for that needs to be taken care of. They have to know that if they are working for the organization, they're not going to be expected as well to do, the same amount of research that they were doing before. So that's important to think about the roles they play. Often they are unclear. So it's more than just the structure. It's about the role they play within the organization. You could say that, well, if they're doing that and not doing research, it means we don't get money. We lose money because they don't get commissioned work. But at the same time, you could argue that you have to hire consultants a lot of the time, so that's also expensive. So you need to make sure you have the right balance in terms of using your senior management team for some projects and bringing in external support for people.
In our experience, senior management team is often more like a crisis team. And they are called whenever there is a crisis in the organization. The discussing with maybe too sensitive to be discussed with the whole crisis. Is that something normal, or?
I think so. I think if I won't say so, if a think tank was to lose a huge contract, for example, the senior management team should get together right away and discuss what do we do, because this might create financial challenge for the organization. But I think that if that's how it's used, which is common, then it's totally being used the best way. You should be avoiding crises. by using a senior management team. Some organizations use a senior management team to decide what projects to bid for example. So before a proposal is sent out, the senior management team reads it and says yes or no. So senior management team is can be given a lot of responsibilities to help manage the organization, keep the direction of the organization.
Do you have any specific criteria for this senior management, such as have been within the organization for more than 7 years, or even if a new person can be part of this senior management?
In my view, the length of time, should somebody who just arrived be part of the senior management team, I don't think that's that important. I would be more concerned about making sure that the entire organization is represented in the senior management team. Because sometimes a problem or a solution could be found in one of the corners of the organization, the IT department, or in the research staff area, or in logistics, in very boring things like changing your internet provider. So if you don't have somebody who can represent that bit of the organization, then you're limited in what you can do with that team. But I don't think that length of service should be an issue. In fact, having a new person might be a good thing, because it might bring new ideas to that team. But if the board is, supports the board owns the organization, but should also be there to support the director, who the board has hired. The senior management team should also be there to support the director, who the director has hired in a way. And so it needs to be useful for the director and the organization.
Related to the governance issue of the senior management team, should the members of this team receive additional compensation on top of the salary as regular staff?
That depends on the way you pay people. So some organizations have a system where everybody gets paid the same, so it's salaries. Other organizations pay a basic, and then if you bring in more work, you get paid more. Other organizations, the staff is completely independent. The salaries are varied. It depends on how much money you bring. You pay a percentage to the organization as an overhead. Depending on that, you might have to pay more or less. If your organization is based on salaries, everybody gets paid a salary which is defined centrally, regardless of how much work you do. Then the position of senior management team member should reflect the extra responsibility and the complexity and the danger of being in a senior management position. Because the danger, I'm going to seriously. But anyway, staff might like you. You might go from being a very, very much liked member of staff to being a boss. So they won't treat you the same way. If you are in an organization where salaries are variable depending on how much money you bring in, and those people are going to be reducing the number of days they can sell as consultants, then you might need to compensate them for that loss. It will depend on the organization staff. And that's another important issue to consider when you have my business model. Try and move on to the next point. The other important issue is slightly related to this. So if you go to the senior management team and you go down, one of the key questions I started to work on, because there is more demand from think tanks, is the way that the research teams are organized. And there are many ways to organize your research component. Research centers, policy, research centers, think tanks. Research is the most important thing. Let's not try to suggest that it's. I don't want to suggest it's not. But the way you organize yourselves has also a lot to do with the origin of the organization and how the organization has developed over the years. So different organizations will organize themselves in different ways. And you're going to have a number of challenges to address and to phase depending on your type of, or the way you organize your research component. There will be an issue of public versus private. So you might be organized in a way internally, right? So you might have, for instance, 4 groups internally. But outside the organization, you might present yourself in a different way. 1 groups, 2 groups, 1 group. It depends on who your audience is and who you're trying to communicate with. You might want to present yourselves in one way and organize yourselves internally in another way. That's perfectly fine. Sometimes we try to come up with the perfect arrangement that works well internally and externally. And that might not be the case. You need to think about how you organize your research team and your research teams so that you encourage career progression. You encourage young researchers to want to stick around, to want to work here, because they will see progression. It will be easier for them to imagine that I stay here for 3 or 4 years, which is a good time to stay. I will grow up. I will move forward. You know, I will be able to go and do a master's and come back, and I know where I am. To encourage that type of career progression. You need to think, so you know, this will be different, right? So you might organize yourself according to disciplines. So some think tanks organize themselves according to disciplines: economics, politics, sociology, law. And that might attract more academically minded, more discipline-minded researchers, because they might say, "Oh, you know, if I focus on this, I'll specialize in economics." You might also organize yourself according to a position: banking, infrastructure, health, education, and that's going to attract another type of researcher who's looking for a different career progression, career path. So that'll have a big effect. Another thing has to do with cohesion, organizational and intellectual cohesion. So depending on how you organize yourselves, you might have everybody working together to achieve a result, you know, changing policy, for instance. Or you might have one group over there working on, I don't know, agriculture, and another group over there working on health, and another group over there working on economic, you know, local economic development, and another group over there working on social protection or child policy issues, and never coming together. So the way you organize your teams will affect the way that your staff comes together and works together. Flexibility. Some arrangements are more flexible than others. If you have lots of separate teams and you want to create, you want to go into a new area of work, that might be very hard because you might have to get rid of one before you can let one in. But if you just have researchers kind of moving around, very, very flexible, then you might just need to bring in one researcher. That might be easier. Or one of your young researchers could say, "Oh, I'll move into that." So the way you organize your research team will allow you to be flexible, which would be good in some cases, but might not give you the credibility that having a large group of people working on one thing for a long time will give you. That's a trade-off. But then organizing yourselves around these strong teams might not give you flexibility that you might need if there is a change in context or if an opportunity arises. And the other thing that has to do with a research team is what I called, based on a study by a think tank in the UK called Nesta, creative decommissioning. One of the things about how you organize yourselves is that think tanks struggle very much to get rid of areas of work. They're very good at adopting new areas. Oh, now we need to work on climate change. Now we need to work on this or that. And they're very bad at closing or getting rid of a program or an area of study, a policy issue. There are lots of issues, and I can talk more about that. Lots of issues related to, you know, I don't want to fire anybody. It could be open. There is some funding still coming in, so why get rid of that? These are tough decisions that need to be made, and they might be easier. To make them depending on the type of organization of your research team, and harder it's mostly. So yeah, those are some of the challenges that arise when we start to talk about the way we organize our research. I think the problem is that the way we organize research teams has to do with the origin of the organization and a bit of a complex history of adjustments along the way. And these adjustments haven't been necessarily thought through, just happened. Now we are the way we are because we know why. This is how it is. And we haven't really thought about, is this the best way to organize a research area, a research teams? So I encourage think tanks to think about this a little more.
In our case, we have moved from a permanent division of the research team. Originally, when SMERU was established, we had 3 divisions: quantitative, qualitative, and yeah. But that was like the history. That allows people to specialize. But the downside that it makes us inflexible, and it's sometimes difficult to form research team within. So after 3 years, I think we decided to abolish this division and just have one research group, and we form teams based on needs. We have this to form this group on instead of sending we call on people to join this team. So it's ad hoc things. The upside is make us more flexible in our work, but the downside is some people have complained that they don't really accumulate knowledge on certain things because they keep constantly having to the new things, which for some people is exciting, but for some people it's scary. Because you keep learning. So I wonder the experience market organization whether which one is preferable, permanent research division teams or
And while we're at this point, do you think it's important that think tanks have an ideological platform in which they operate? I mean, in terms of, let's say, one think tank leads to social market economics, or they lean towards a more liberal ideas, and how do they ensure that the employees have the same worldview or the same values like the think tank itself?
Yeah. Let me. That's a very important comment. So let me park it here, and maybe we can put on the staff, the research teams, how they organize. So SMERU has a very similar approach, not exactly the same, but very similar to what I think the Center for Global Development in the US has, where it's researchers in general, junior researchers can move around. They can work for several senior researchers. But the senior researchers, they specialize not on a discipline or on a narrow policy issue, but what they do is they develop initiatives. So they're there only if they have a big idea, a big initiative that so they wanna eliminate malaria. They want to get rid of the traffic in Jakarta. So that's their thing. That's a very clear, practical objective. So they organize teams to help them deliver that objective. They do research, they communicate. So they organize themselves that way. Young researchers is a great opportunity to learn many things, to try being a bit qualitative, quantitative researchers, to sometimes manage projects and get involved in different types of activities. As you progress in your career, you might want to specialize in something. So there's a trade-off, but it's a very attractive idea. And they're very flexible because if a new idea comes along, just bringing one person, they don't need to invest too much. But what about other organizations?
Yeah.
Um, our our institution actually we are uh, from NGOs, and then we transform to think tank. We had some problems with because if we want to live to survive, so we need some projects. But the problem then our identity then has a problem because we want to be much more think tank, much more research. But if we want to survive, we still want to this project. But the problem is how is the direction then? And then the second one, our problem is that as we know, usually NGO, if we have some senior like executive director, then if the period is finished, and then he or she just left. So that's a real problem in most NGO in Indonesia actually, because then the problem is the knowledge and the experience, the network is not within the organization, so it's just like so that is the problem. And then the most problem that we are now trying to solve is about the career aspirations, the career aspirations. So how to make that the people in organization feeling that because we are small organization, and then we still need a career. We need a career. I mean, 3 years or 5 years still in that position. So it makes frustrating. Yeah. But the problem is we also have a problem with financial, of course, because if we have some career like the next step after some years after some achievement, then there's increased salary and then increased salary. So we also have a problem about financial secure. So can we afford to pay the salary for these people? So that is I think many of us are thinking about this. Some of organizations in Indonesia now, NGO, transform to the think tank. So that is the real problem. Thank you.
Thank you. You've mentioned quite a few things, which has to do with some of the things that we talked before. So the governance is the role of senior management team. Actually, and it has a lot to do with this aspect of organizing your research, because the way you organize your research, in a way, is the way you make money. If you organize your research around key themes, key issues, key policy issues, that's a way of capturing certain projects or accessing certain funds. If you organize yourselves in a flexible way, there's also your way of accessing funds and getting some new projects. And as you say, this will affect the identity of the organization. You might be known as an organization who can do a little bit of everything. You work on any sector, and you can come up with great ideas in any sector. Or you can be one who is known for its expertise in 1 or 2 sectors, 3 or 4 sectors. And therefore, different organizations, different funders, different government agencies, different NGOs will approach you if you want one type or another type of organization. Managing whatever model you choose will require a strong senior management team, a strong director, a strong board, because you need to keep an eye on these models to see if they're working for you or not. There's always going to be the problem of money, right? And money is always going to be a problem. Accessing funds is always going to be a challenge. So you cannot control that. You need to be able to improve the way you deal with your context, the way it is, and that's where government and management comes along. I will use the I think I have another. I'll talk about I'll jump to staffing so that I can talk to you about your question. In developed Ben's the founder, so now in developed countries, think tanks are political. In countries where funding is domestic, or where funding comes from domestic local foundations, when it comes from the government, when it comes from individuals, when it comes from political actors, from interest groups, like in the UK, like in the US, like in Germany, like in China, like in Little India, like in Brazil, like in Argentina, like in Chile, like in some of South Africa, Mexico. Not just developed, but fairly mature, word to use, but mature political systems. Nobody has a doubt that think tanks are political. And they are, because you're trying to affect policy, and that's politics. In developing countries, or where funding is mostly from outside, donors, especially from outside, bring the idea, the illusion, that they're non-political, right? That they are technocratic, that they are neutral. And I'm not suggesting that think tanks are partisan. Right? They're not necessarily supporting a political party, but we are political, we're all political. And everybody has ideological decisions. Everybody has value systems. And think tanks that are more open about their value systems, I find it easier to get the attention of key audiences, key funders even. They're going to get more funding, might get less funding, but that funding is going to be more stable because it's going to be associated to a group. They're going to be seen as, okay, I know where you're coming from, therefore I want to work with you. But also you're going to attract the kind of people you want to attract. So no one would apply to the Heritage Foundation in the US, for example, if they were supporters of they were liberals in the US. They wouldn't. It would be silly, because those think tanks are very open about their ideological status. So in a way, you signal your audiences, your funders, and your future staff, letting them know where you're coming from and what you believe in. So I'm not suggesting you say, we want to support this party, but I think think tanks need to be a little more open about what they stand for, what are their core values. And I don't mean saying, we're participatory, we're transparent. Those are organizational values. I mean more, what is our definition of justice? You're on the left, you're on the right, you're Aristotelian, you're Kantian, we have different definitions of justice. You have to say. Because when you deal with this justice, it's fair allocation of resources. And if you are on the right, you'll have a different view of what's fair, and if you're on the left, you'll have a different view of what's fair. So that helps you, I think, helps you find and even retain staff. And that's one of the other big challenges of staffing, human resources. I'm not suggesting you need to have a huge human resources department, although some large think tanks should have at least one person keeping an eye on staff. But you have to think about staff as central to your organization, because your people are your most precious asset. You trade people and ideas.
Before going to that, can we go back to the ideology? It's possible for a think tank to have an open position, meaning that its researchers can have different ideology.
Yes, of course you have, but then I would, if that's what you have and that's what you want, then I would make a point of that. So I would organize lots of public debates where my researchers, have public discussions. I would put that on my website. I would say this is a sort of multi-party, cross-ideological space. Come and debate, come and share, come and have a discussion. And I think sometimes we say it, but in reality it isn't. And that's why we're not public about it. what tends to happen is that you have different, you might have you don't have different ideologies within the organization, but you have a very similar ideology, but it's not too extreme. It's very centric, so it's not clear where you stand. But you might have different policy ideas. So you might disagree on what needs to be done, what's a priority, how to solve a problem. But you have a similar ideological background. And I think we confuse different policy positions with different political positions. So, but if you do want to have that, you want to have a very plural. If you want to be a plural actor, then you have to make an effort to bring in those different views and host them as much as you can. Because what's going to matter is not what you think. What's going to matter is what your public thinks. And your audiences are going to think you are on the left or on the right or this or that. And that's what's going to matter. So there's a very good case of Brookings. Brookings is a fairly middle of the political spectrum organization in the US, the largest think tank. But the Republicans see Brookings as a left-wing organization. They see it as a liberal organization. So when the Republicans are in charge of Congress, Brookings researchers don't get invited as much. They go way down in the list of invitees for meetings. And the Republican think tanks, conservative think tanks get invited. Not because Brookings is on the left or is on the side of the Democrats, because the Republicans perceive them to be on the side of the Democrats. And that's what matters, is the perception of the audience, much more than. So I always feel that when a think tank goes out of its way to say that they have no ideology, that they're technocratic, that they allow the evidence to speak, I feel that means that you are ideological, you are not technocratic, and you're trying to make a big effort to tell us that you're in fact neutral. So just embrace it. Just play there. If your funding didn't come from foreign sources, then this would not be an issue. Nobody would mind that you had a particular set of values, market to status, community, empowerment, cooperatives are good. So I want to talk about staffing as a key thing. So the staff is another one of the aspects of this discussion about governance and management that we keep leaving for later. Because staff is going to define your capacity. You have the best people in the organization, not just as researchers, but also in the finance office, in admin, in communication, in IT, in the office logistics, in organizing events, in filming the event, in getting the coffee ready. That's going to make a big difference. Think tanks are all about people. You could do without the buildings. You could all have a think tank and meet in coffee shops with Wi-Fi. The building is not important. Maybe it's useful, but it's not about the building. It's not about the books you publish or the briefings you publish. A briefing paper never influences anyone. If I am a policymaker and I see a briefing paper, I'm not going to read this and go, that changed my mind. It's the name in the briefing paper. It's the idea in the briefing paper. And most of all, it's the conversations over a period of time that the policymakers are having with researchers. So it's the people and their ideas that are the most important thing in a think tank. So you need to be able to hire the best you can, taking into account that you cannot pay them the best salaries. You need to keep them in the organization for as long as you can, but not too long. You don't want them to stay too long, because if they stay too long, they get comfortable. They don't come up with new ideas. Researchers need to come and go. You need to go to government and come back. Go to private sector and come back. Maybe go to academia for a bit. Go away, study, work somewhere else in another country and come back. You want some level of rotation, but you don't want to lose them, right? So you need to manage that rotation. But also, and this is a key thing,
you need to be able to fire people. And in my experience, very few think tanks know how to get rid of staff.
How do you fire that?
To fire director.
There's some techniques.
You need to be able to fire everyone in your organization. And I come across many organizations where this hasn't happened for a very long time. And so they're paying salaries that they don't need to pay, so it's burdening everybody else. It undermines management. It lowers morale because people feel, well, there's people there who don't do anything, keep being moved around. Donors eventually get upset because they keep getting, researchers who are not any good, but somehow they keep being put in bids and used in their work. So we need to know how to do this without, I know the word firing sounds bad, has a negative connotation, but we don't need to make it sound negative. We just need to make sure that the organization has the right people for what it needs. And that includes executive directors, that includes senior management, definitely, and board members. So if you are in a corporation, and you were, you have a rough period of time, you are in the red, you are losing money, the board's going to hire a CEO who is experienced in dealing with these situations. It's going to probably fire the CEO who was there before. And it's going to hire a CEO who knows how to deal with crisis. When the crisis is over, that CEO is gone. And a new CEO comes along to manage the good days. Because there are CEOs that know how to manage crises and are terrible when it comes to growth. And there's some that are good at growth, but are terrible when it comes to maintaining the organization. And the same thing applies to board members. The same thing applies to researchers. And firing is not always about firing people who are not doing their job. You could be doing a great job. It's just not, we don't need you anymore. Or we won't need you in the next 3 years. We need to start thinking about new skills for the organization. We need to renew the way we do. Some organizations, because they don't have the same product, they haven't thought about this. They keep adding staff. We have more staff, you need more projects. More projects is more admin. More admin is more cost. You need more projects. You pay for that extra central cost. So you end up in this growth path that you can't get out of. And you need a bigger building. You need to buy more computers. You need to pay for more, more flexible variable costs. It's impossible. So thinking about this is crucial.
On that, it is that the complication is that we have a labor laws which make it very difficult for any employer to hire people and very, very costly.
Yeah. It's not the only place. So if Ben was here, I would say to him, and that's something I want to do, starting to do when we do it here, but maybe get a lot of think tanks here, hire a lawyer or a researcher in law from a university. And I think what think tanks need is legal advice, really good legal advice, to understand how they can work their way around some of these challenges. But this is something that affects all companies. Peru is the same thing. It used to be that you could hire young people in temporary contracts, and so it was good for them because they got the experience. It was good for the organization because it wasn't committed to them for a long time. But now, because of similar legislation, it makes it harder to hire because you realize that you're not going to be able to get rid of them if you need to get rid of them. So I'm not suggesting that you should do it. But it's something you need to really think about it because then it can have a huge effect on the organization's sustainability. And then we need to think about the business model. If this is impossible, if it's impossible for us to change our workforce, as we should, as a think tank, then we need to rethink our business. Think tanks should be used to growing and shrinking. You should be able to grow, double your size in 1 year, and then 2 years later, half your size. because of changes in funding, because of changes in the political environment, without that destroying the organization, without that killing the organization. You should be able to do that. That's what an organization should be able to do. Because you're not an academia, you don't have the subsidy of teaching. You know, if you were an academic institution, and you were a think tank within a university, they have that subsidy in a way come to teaching that allows you to grow and stay big because you have more students, you have more teaching responsibility. But a research organization and NGO needs to be flexible. I'm not suggesting that's something you can do, but you won't be able to do anything about it, right? But it's worth thinking about what can be done.
We don't have too many experiences in hiring people. I wonder if anybody here has more experience in hiring.
Yes, we did several times. Yes, because if the competence is not fulfill our standard, and also if he or she gives a bad environment. I mean, we need not only analytical skill but also soft skill. So that is a real problem, and I think the most important, one of the most important in the organization is, especially in beginning, is feeling comfortable to express something.
Yeah.
So if someone makes the bad influence and feeling not comfortable, so people very hesitate to express something, and this is will become a bigger and bigger problem. So
Yeah.
we must.
You reminded me of something else. I use the word firing. Maybe I should change it because that's not really all I mean. So I was involved in a case in a previous employment where a staff member was the organization was trying to fire the staff member because of the soft skills social capital rather than quality or competence. But to fire this person, they had to argue that he was incompetent at his work. And so to do that, they had to really challenge him and make him go through a very uncomfortable process. So that at the end of that process, he would be labeled as incompetent and the organization would fire. The solution would have been right at the beginning, and this was going to be a year-long process because in some countries it's the same in Indonesia. The legislation is very hard, makes it very hard. The solution would have been the HR department. That's why an HR department might be important. Is to say to this person, explain to this person, you are the wrong fit for this organization, right? It's not you're incompetent. It's just you don't fit in what we need or how the organization works. But we're going to help you. We're going to help you get a better job where you do fit. We're going to help you. We're not going to just try to fire you and make it difficult for you to get a job some other place. We're going to help you find that other job. So that would be cheaper for this organization, less traumatic for everybody, and a good thing to do in a way, decent thing to do. So there are other ways in which we can think of renewing our workforce, not getting rid of people, but maybe encouraging them to go because it's in their best interest to do something else. You can encourage them to go and so you're not there yet to be a senior researcher. But you go and do a master's, or you can go and spend some time in another organization and get some experience. We'll take you. Okay, so give it a go. You don't need to, firing is probably too strong. It's trying to create a reaction instead of reaction, but there's other ways in which we can do that.
But in your case, how did you do it? What did you say?
Yes, usually we say to him or her that we still need them, but but now much more in temporary, much more in terms. So if we need we need something that they have the skills, so we will invite. So that is that is what we do, and also the some rationalization also. The other case is that we make peer evaluation. So we get input from other staff about how their relation with this person. So that is one also reasons to make us talk to them, and then also we also should consider about very much about the work contract. So that is really important. So we should thinking that probably it could be happen that we cannot predict now. So we should some reserve that probably we will like we have some 3 months periods to evaluate something like that. So if then we are not then we don't violate the law. So that is our strategy. Yeah.
So that's good. That's a good point, and it leads to the next point also now mentioned is about line management and appraisals. So a core aspect of managing staff and of managing the organization is having good line management. And many organizations fail at this very much. So it describes the relationship between the manager and managing. So you manage somebody, and they manage somebody else, and they manage somebody. Usually, you should manage more than 5 people. 6, 7, maybe more than that's too much. So you should have a structure that is appropriate. But having good line management prevents situations like these from happening, and also gives you the evidence and gives you the arguments that you need to either encourage them to leave or to effectively say, you have to go. But line management is important, and there are a number of things that I think I'd like to highlight. One is to do with unclear roles. How many you all work for some organization? Show of hands. Do you know where to find the job descriptions? The document that says for every job, every job title in your organization, there should be a job description. A document that describes what that job is about. Would you be able to find it in your organizations? Who wouldn't be able to find it? Anybody who wouldn't be able to find it?
It's in the internet.
You would all be able to find it.
Yes.
Is that
That's for yourself or for the rest of the organisation?
For everybody in the organization. And I understand the reality is that a lot of jobs in think tanks are not written down. So a lot of jobs are not being written down carefully, describing the objectives of the job, who they are responsible to and for, the tasks that job involves, the qualifications expected of that job, the values of the organization, etc. They only get written up when you're hiring somebody. Oh, we need to hire a head of research, let's write it up. We need to hire a research officer, let's write it up. And then that write-up is lost somewhere and it doesn't write. Directors, executive directors' job descriptions, often nowhere to be found. Senior management, senior staff, nowhere to be found. And that's important. So the first thing that I wanted to think about is, do we have the right job descriptions? And they have to make sense together, right? If you put them all together in a table, they have to make sense. They have to connect to each other in the right way. This is important. That means that each role is clear. People coming into that job know exactly what they're supposed to do. So if I get promoted from senior researcher to head of program, I know how my job changes. And I go from head of program to member of senior management team, I know how my job changes. And it has to be very, very clear. And these need to be reviewed on a regular basis. So the first problem with line management is some people don't know what their job is about. So it's not very clear to them that they have to manage somebody else. You know, I'm a senior researcher. I have to do research. I'm senior. But there's nowhere in the document that says, oh, but by the way, you are also responsible for these people. Not just for their professional well-being, but their personal well-being at the time. Management is a lot about, you know, managing the personal well-being of your staff. Because it's unclear, you know, often managers don't do anything about it. So that wasn't in my job description. You know, I have other things to do. That's important. Often, again, this goes I'm reiterating. You don't pay for these things. Often things like you don't pay for the time that somebody spends managing their staff, their teams. We assume this is going to be part of the project, so it's what I call project management. You know, you manage by project. That's not the way you manage. You need to be able to sit down with your staff and discuss with them, not just what they're doing in their work, but also their lives, because that affects the work. That's outside of the project that you might be working with them, telling them what to do. So performance appraisal systems are a very good tool. I know SMERU has one. I know you have a fairly 360-ish, as 360 as you can go, asking several people about an individual. So performance appraisal systems are very useful, but because they focus the attention of the manager on their co-managers, the people in their charges. But you have to go beyond the usual, we meet twice a year or once a year, and that's it. You have to use these appraisals not to judge ex post, but to prevent problems, you know, to plan ahead. You're having trouble with these things. Let's work so that when we get to our next meeting, you won't have those problems. So it's about identifying the shortfalls, the challenges and problems that staff have way before they become a problem an issue. And that's why many of performance appraisal systems nowadays are focusing on competencies. They're not too bothered with how many papers are you going to write this year, you know, how much money are you going to bring in. That's okay. That's like an appendix to the appraisal. The appraisal is really about competencies. You know, and you're a good communicator, and you're a good team worker. How is your leadership skills? You know, how are your leadership skills going? Do you know how to express an idea? Do you know how to manage and organize? So it's about the competencies that you need to be an effective member of an organization. And that helps you decide what kind of training they might need, what kind of support they might need, mentoring, etc., before these things become a problem. So this effective governance, so effective management, therefore, an effective management, line management, is also, as I said, it's about governance. It's about how many do you manage? You have time to manage. How does management fit in the rest of the organization? Has it been given an important central place? Is there a human resources team, or is there a human resource support service of some kind that might help me, a manager, but a manager with no experience in managing, to make those tough decisions about how to work with my staff, my charges? When I was a manager, I struggled. I enjoyed the one-on-one conversations and having a good relationship with my staff, but I didn't know much about management, especially so for me, I enjoyed it, but it was a struggle. It took me 5 days to get through an issue, but probably could have taken me 2 or 3 days if I had some HR support to explain to me what was going on, and help me preempt some of these problems. So having support might actually save money to the organization. You spend money on having somebody, but you save money because you avoid these problems. And the key thing to do is when you're doing a performance appraisals is I think organizations should be thinking more about using these line management systems and performance appraisal systems to, as I said, to get the best out of their staff rather than to just punish them for not doing their work. But you've got to think about these things. Because if you don't think about these things, you might run into problems if you incorporate, for instance, if you tie the appraisals to salaries. Some organizations will use the appraisals as a way of deciding who gets a raise and who doesn't. That might be a problem if you don't do it properly. If you want to do a 360 appraisal, you have to do it carefully. So you have to have systems in place. To do that, you have to first have clear line management, good line management. So everybody is accounted for. Everybody's being looked at first. And then you can start doing the appraisal and the judging and the evaluating. And I know we're getting ready for lunch, so I'm going to go to the kind of the last point, just about monitoring. Yeah, should I touch about it? I think another point is about central services that I sort of touched a lot. Communications, management, finance, and when I say it's about competences and skills. So we talked about this before. You know, how do you attract the best people in finance, communications, and in management positions when you can't pay them what the private sector is usually paying them? I think when it comes to communications, that's okay now. I think think tanks have not had trouble getting good communications staff. They have trouble wanting to. So the barrier is not that they're not out there and that they cannot afford them. The barrier is wanting to get them. So it's still in that position of saying, do we really need more than a couple of people, more than one person? And I think they do. But once they decide they want communication staff, I think they can find them with not too many problems. The challenge is more on the finance side and management. Finance is a big thing. So most organizations, in essence, what they have is really accounting departments. They have teams who are dealing with invoices, dealing with bank accounts, who are basically moving money around. But another organization, what they need is finance, strategic finance. Is deciding what to do with the grant they get every year, at the beginning of the year. Just put it in a bank account. Is maybe thinking about, well, you know, if we get core funding from DFA every year for the next 5 years, we're not going to know. You know, can we not actually use that income that we know is coming to get more money from some other source? That would be. So that's a little more sophisticated financial discussions. And I think think tanks don't take advantage of all they could do with the income they get. Can we use some of the money we get to get a mortgage? You know, they could. Think them to potentially say that, you know, to a bank, you know, this is a contract that says I'm going to get X amount of money every year for the next 10 years. In the next 5 years. You know, that's enough for a mortgage. Okay. So maybe I can get a mortgage. But that requires a little more sophisticated financial advice. And that's a big challenge. So they need to find a way of doing that. Because good financial teams, really financial teams, will be able to make it easier on research staff and others when it comes to fundraising. They will be able to help them work less rather than encourage them to work more. But that's a skill that competence that is difficult to find. And the same thing applies to management, as we already talked about, so that's why I thought it was important to address. You remember, these people are going to be dealing with complex legal frameworks, they're going to be dealing with NGO legislation that is usually anti-NGO in countries. They're going to be dealing with funders. Each one of them has their own conditions and their own candidates, their own reporting requirements. So it's more than just complying with what the fund as one. It's about being strategic about the way you use to access your funds. And also to help the director to make those decisions.
I think you can share your view on this specific finance for our experience. This is our director of finance.
I think what Enrique has mentioned is also some of the knowledge that we should learn, like to strategically manage our financial, not just in terms of the accounting, but in SMERU we have been trying to be more innovative in the way that we manages our financing. For example, like investing in a more sophisticated method rather than just the deposito, certificate of deposit. I think, but I think it's an important tool to learn, to be more prepared for financial sustainability.
And we also get help from professional financial managers, like from the bank.
Yeah. So I think this is crucial. I mean, as you say, resources tend to be limited, so you need to try to use them maximum. And sometimes it's about saving money, not being spending money you think you need to spend. But a lot of times it's let's try to see if you can take advantage of the opportunities that the financial markets offer. And I think NGOs in general tend to shy away from being more entrepreneur, more financially savvy, seen as a for-profit. But fine, don't redistribute your profits, but make some. It's going to help you if you want to develop a reserve or an endowment for your organization.
But that also involves risk, to finance. So I wonder if another organization would be willing to share experience in managing that finance. Maybe it's sensitive and
Regarding the sustainability, financial sustainability of SMERU, for example, we have received suggestion from our, what do they call it, reviewer, that SMERU should think of having business excluded. What do you think? Business arm, like that. Thinking in business life, or having something that we could do which give us profits. What do you think about that?
That's a good point. So if you went into that, you have a number of options, and it would be very risky to go into that without the right advice and without having very excellent managers and heads of finance and people who understand everything, legal advice. Because there are a lot of risks, but you can pay off. So there are different models. Some organizations will have a business, a for-profit arm, let's say a for-profit company to deal with sales of books, trainings, workshops, things that are more for-profit in nature. Or accessing, for instance, I think in Indonesia, NGOs cannot access public funds. But if you had a private arm, SMERU Limited or SMERU Inc., maybe SMERU Inc. could access public funds. That would be a good way of doing it. But don't do that thinking that it's business as usual. It's a different business model. It might require completely different leadership. It might not. It might just be, you sometimes sign contracts as SMERU Research Institute, sometimes you sign contract as SMERU Consultancy. That might be it. But it might also imply big changes in the way the organization is structured, the incentives for the people doing work for the company, and the people doing work for the rent office space and make some money out of it. Some organizations have invested, sometimes historically, sometimes they do it, invest in businesses, in hotels, in office space, in companies, for instance, related to what the organization could do, market research companies. So, you're good at doing surveys. Well, they do surveys. They charge the private sector for that service. Again, could be a good idea. Could bring in enough money, but you might need a completely different set of skills and a governance that allows you to manage that. And then some organizations, without having to create a new organization or a new business model, what they try to do is they try to develop products that they can sell. So, you do a poverty map. You do a poverty map for Indonesia, and then you do a poverty report, and the poverty report you can sell. And the nominal price would be enough to pay something. You could then say, we're going to do a poverty map per region or per district, and we are going to sell that. So you won't sell the big one, but if you are a authority at the regional level, you want to know what's going on in your region, you're going to have to pay for that. So that's what some organizations will do. They will create products, standalone products that are done every year. An index, a study on cities, a study on the state of something, which they can sell. And that's, for instance, that is not incompatible with their business model as it is. So you've got many options. But again, before you jump into any of these options, these questions, these things we're talking about today, you've got to think about it. You've got to think through these things before you decide to take on the challenge of having a different or a parallel business model to the one you were in.
I would be interested to hear the experience of our friends from other people on this financial issue. I think we share a common problem.
Financial challenge.
Well, probably they don't come with their financial officer. Yeah, well, just to add to Ibu Nuning's comment, sometime last year I went to Germany and the Netherlands, and the term spin-offs is very popular there.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a business arm, but it's simply the same unit but smaller and with different management that allows more flexibility in innovation. What do you think about spin-off in research centers that you have come to?
Well, you've heard about 3IE, the
3IE, yeah.
impact evaluation. That was developed by Center for Global Development, CGD in Washington, and then it was their goal. So some organizations are good at that. Some organizations are very good at focusing on initiatives. And they develop the initiative, they develop a mechanism, they develop a program, a project, and then they let go. And that's their business model. The business model is selling in a way. They're not necessarily selling it, but they're selling these initiatives that they create. They do a lot, so they do the startup. And once the project, the organization, the initiative, the coalition, the network is sustainable, it's ready to go, a funder will come along and say, I want it. I want that. So that's a very good model. It means that the organization can then focus on something else. You might say, okay, so we have a flagship report, let's say your poverty map. That may be something you want to hold on to. But maybe you like to have space to do something else, and you need to get rid of that group of people working on the poverty map. So you might want to has a spin-off of that. Just let it go. Yeah, the people who run the program might actually enjoy it because they might get more flexibility, right? They
Yes.
might get more funding, maybe easier. And then the organization is free, in a way, forced to do something else, to come up with a new idea. So spin-off model is not bad, but you have to, again, think it through. You have to have a way of developing these initiatives, thinking with that in mind. The British government has something called the Nudge Unit. It's looking at behavioral economics. So it's about how you get people to do things by the way you advertise the thing, the way you invite messages in utility bills and then on a tax form. So it's interesting, something new. And they set it up. It was set up by a think tank called the Institute for Government. And then it was picked up by the Prime Minister's office. So it was a unit within the office of the Prime Minister. And then the office of the Prime Minister has privatized it. So has sold it off to a think tank, to a foundation. So an idea from a think tank was sold in a way to the government. The government built it up, and then the government has now sold it, making money to a foundation. So it is a way to create value and to probably get some income for a research organization. But that means that you have to take the money you get in from the funder. For instance, you do get institutional funding or endowment, right? And you have to say, instead of using this, pay running costs to do business as usual, we're going to use this money to develop 3 or 4 initiatives, 5 initiatives. One of them will be successful. So you have to invest that money. And for that, you need a board to know about that, to have to give you the mandate. You need a director and a team that know how to do this. You need a senior management team that understands this and is willing to work on that. You need to rearrange your research team in the right way so that these initiatives can be developed. You might need some extra central services support, and you might not have in the organization, etc. So it's about changing the way the organization works. That doesn't come with just change. You need to think about your governance.
What about ODI? Does it have spin-off?
I haven't worked there for a while, so I don't think it's a spin-off type of organization. ODI is more a project organization, so it's good at working on a donor-funded project, building a project, and then the project will tend to either become a program within the organization, and therefore just gets entrenched in the organization, or funding runs out and kind of dies away. But it's not an initiative-driven organization. So ODI is more about working with funders, bidding for projects that funders find them, than it is developing its own projects and then looking for funding for those projects. It's never had the endowment that they needed. There's also the way the business model has been set up. You need to get projects. It's more of a research consultancy, which is what most think tanks are. Most think tanks, there's nothing wrong with this. Most think tanks are research consultancies, and they do their best to develop a cohesive, agenda and work, but they struggle. Few think tanks are driven by staff initiatives and ideas, and then they need to talk.
When CGD created CRE, did it give any financial benefit to CGD or just after that right?
I don't know the detail of the story, but I don't know the detail of the story of the theory. But if they went about the usual way, so they would have put together a team of people who maybe one of the senior researchers who was putting the team together had identified a gap or an issue that needed to be addressed, and he or she would have worked on this issue and developed a proposal of how to solve this problem. And then they would have worked together to look for funding to help develop this proposal. So funding would have come to CDB to develop the concept, the idea, and probably to establish the startup of PRE and other initiatives like that. And then maybe they decided this is big enough, this is strong enough, this looks like a separate thing, so let's let it go. Because CDB doesn't want its staff to be stuck managing projects. So they want them to be thinking about the new idea. It's an interesting, I've written a lot about that in my blog, and I'm happy to share it widely. But they've just written a lessons learned paper on this, on their approach, which is very, very interesting. If you go around CGV, and if they're watching now, I talk a lot about them quite a bit. If you go around CGV, and I think this is interesting, if you ask to be given a tour, so if you're ever in Washington, go to CGV, get a tour, what they'll do is they'll say, they'll introduce you to the researchers, the senior researchers, and the way they get needed to it, so I hope they continue to do that, is they say, this is so-and-so, and his big idea is this. This is so-and-so, and her big idea is this. So it's about ideas. Each senior researcher is working on an idea or an initiative to solve a problem, to solve something. If you go to most other organizations and you get a similar tour, what you're going to get is, this is so-and-so, and he's working on social protection, or he's working with the World Bank. Well, this is so-and-so, and she's working on an urban development, and she's doing some work in sanitation. So the normal introduction is about the project you're working on, the fundraising. In CGD, it's all about your big idea. If you have a big idea, great. If you don't have a big idea, you don't fit in the organization. I like that because I think that's initiative driven. To develop your ideas in motion. The other one is you're constantly, working on whatever is available. No, it's easy to judge. No, not. It's easy for me to judge, but I know that it's hard to be in the ideas. But it's worth trying. I think. I certainly have great conversations in those think tanks whenever I visit.
Who decides whether an idea is legal?
You know it. I think you know it. I think if a researcher from SMERU came along and said, I want to solve this problem that nobody is tackling. Flooding in Jakarta. You get flooding next door to the Ritz-Carlton, to 5 to 6 hours, stuff like that. If somebody in SMERU was able to come up with a solution, wealth finance, wealth but that's what you're aiming for. I mean, you're aiming for problems that are going to be there for as long as somebody deals with them. They're going to be there for 10, 20, 30, 50 years unless somebody deals with these things. So when it's a big idea, when adopting the idea would change things. Change would be very different. You can think about new ways of teaching, new ways of transferring funds. You come up with any, it's about the researchers having the ability to do that. But that's not just about, having researchers come up with a big idea. The organization needs to be organized in a way that allows this to happen. It doesn't look down on the researcher who is just walking around, and visiting and doing a lot of the legwork that we need to do to be able to decide what the problem is and what you need to do to solve it. So it's a lot of not making any money for a few months. So is the organization able to bankroll that? And we can't just do it.
I think we are not in that stage yet. I had experience. I was decided to become a member of the steering committee of an initiative. It's multi-million-dollar initiative whose motto is idea that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think after this initiative ran for 3 years, spent many million dollars. Not that's not really big idea.
Yeah, I mean, but I think, I don't know what the initiative was, but you cannot expect every single initiative to be successful. That's all. I mean, that's the thing. But that leads me to the last point, which is about monitoring and evaluation. What you're going to get a lot is about monitoring and evaluating influence. So a lot of the attention from funders is going to be, are you doing enough to monitor and evaluate the influence you have on policy? If you're realistic, right? If you really are realistic, you should not expect many of your ideas, your recommendations, to be adopted by anybody. When I talk to think tanks in developed countries or think tanks that are domestically funded, they're quite happy, quite satisfied with their ideas having an impact in the media, so being picked up by the media and making it to the public arena. They're quite happy to, if their work leads to them and their researchers being called by policymakers and government in general to discuss things, to talk about things, if they're used as a reference to their work. And then even very happy, depending whether they are in opposition, quote unquote, or in government because of their ideological position. They're quite happy if they hear that the government is really upset about something they've done. Think tanks tend to want to, think tanks need to consider that sometimes if the government is angry with you, it's a good thing. It's a sign that you're influential. Sometimes I write things on my blog, and I get an email from somebody who's really upset at what I wrote. And I said, well, thank you, because that means I'm important. I don't think I am. I think I have a blog that barely anybody reads. But it must be important because they thought that me saying it mattered. So I think think tanks need to think about that as well. So it's not just about influencing policy. It's also about just a sense of changing the debate, breaking the consensus, making a bit of a fuss. And actually, but what donors don't pay too much attention on, and you will see this if you get a self-assessment from your funders. A lot of it will be the kind of things they want to know. They want to know about you, or they want to know about you, so that they can tell if they're giving you money to influence policy that you are in fact doing that, right? They want to be able to tell their constituents, we're giving them money and they're doing something with it. What organizations need to think more about is monitoring for management. So what do you monitor? What do you keep an eye on so that you can manage better, so you can be more effective internally? That should be the first thing. Do you have all the information to make the best informed decision? So if you are a young researcher, do you have all the information you need to do your work properly? If you are a little manager, do you have all the information you need? If you are head of finance, do you have all the information you need? And that's more important. So some of the things you should be looking at is monitoring the performance of the governance arrangement. So you should be looking at how the organization is structured and governed and see if that fits what you want it to do. It's a bit about, does the form allow you to deliver on your mandate, on your vision? And often it doesn't. Often the governance is structured in a way that it doesn't work for what you want. It's because the governance is just a conclusion of many years of iterations and fixes and corrections. The other thing you need to monitor is your staff competencies. capacities, and you can do that through appraisals. But as I say, it's more important to deal with the competencies of staff rather than with the specific tasks and targets. Targets are good if you want to have at a team level, maybe, but or the project level. But at the organizational level, you want to make sure you have the staff with the right competencies. You have to monitor that. You also want to monitor, of course, your projects and initiatives. Right? You want to know whether you're delivering what you say you were going to deliver. I said I'm going to produce this paper for this project, and I have produced it. It's to be done on time, etc. But a key thing here is not just monitoring whether you delivered the outputs that you promised. And this is something I find quite shocking, is that very few organizations I work with will be able to tell me how many person days were spent in delivering any particular project, or how many days it took any researcher to write one of the briefing papers there or one of the working papers there. A very basic time sheet. And this is important because if you don't do that, if you don't know how many days it takes you to deliver something, you don't know if your projects are making you any money or you're losing money on them. So we tend to monitor the outputs and the outcomes of our project because that's what funders want. Right? But we need to know whether we're delivering outputs and outcomes or not. That's really matter. We need to know how much time we're spending, how much money we're spending for this. Because then you know whether you're being successful. You should be able to say how much it takes on average to write a briefing paper, how much it takes on average, how much it costs on average to organize an event, and what type of event. You need to say how much it takes on average to do certain types of research. Because if you budget, you need to go somewhere to look for the appropriate budget for that type of activity. And often we don't know. So you might be losing loads of money on budgets, still being good at delivering good outputs. But maybe you need to improve your budget, you might be under budget, so you could be getting more money. Or maybe you're being quite inefficient and you need to improve the way you run your project. So you need to monitor that with a lot of care. You need to monitor quality across the organization, so everybody can be judged on the quality of the work they do. So it's possible to monitor quality, but everybody will have different types of outputs, right, of activities. So you don't judge everybody by the same standards. But you have to keep an eye on standards. That's always the case. And that's one of those things that is also difficult to address. If you're in a think tank, if you're a fundraiser, you don't want to tell them, I think your quality is not that good. It usually comes up later in the relationship. It's one of the first things this.
Just I don't know what country you come from as a candidate. Is what you're not with now actually already in experiment or executed in your country, whether the research company or institution also have another social marketing department to support the activity of the tendency of the research companies. Is that in your country already incorporated or something already true? And then Indonesia need to learn from your country how to run the research institution. This is all what you do. That in your country already also run independent company to support the independence.
No, I think that's what you mean. But I'm just talking about research, about research institutes across the world. So no, not from my country. These are just the lessons that I've often shared
Companies, something like that, but really it's also important to have another manager selling products? And what kind of products do you want?
You're referring to the discussion about having a separate.
Fundraising, yes.
On that point, I was only suggesting there are different models. There are different models to raise income. Some might require a different structure, some might not. But there are many examples out there, just looking at the ones that are more important to control. But to be able to decide that, you need to have a monitoring. You need to monitor the organization, all these different levels, and also the context in which the organization works. And again, that sounds as a separate thing to monitoring, to governance and management. But actually, not only it's important to know what the right governance and management structure is if you monitor what you're doing and how you're doing it. But also, it's through good governance and good management that you're going to collect all that information that you need, all that monitoring information that you need to make decisions, to make good management decisions. So they're not separate. They're not separate things. In the end, monitoring is about preempting those challenges that you're going to have from poor governance and poor management. It's about catching them early rather than letting them, grew and develop and become impossible to be overcome at the end. So those are things I'm open up for comments on M&E or monitoring or questions.
Yeah, I have a question about the time sheet. I think, the last reviewer have also suggested this to us, many other people have suggested to us, but we have not been able to develop or to define the time sheet, which can be easily filled in by the staff without taking too much their time and effort. We don't want them to spend half day.
Timesheets, like appraisals, are a very contentious issue. In my experience, having had to fill in very long timesheets, at the beginning it took a bit of time, and after a while, it's not a big deal. It's easy. It doesn't take you more than 10 minutes a week. The problem is that if they're too complicated, they have too many lines, you end up lying. You end up pretending this is how much you forget. So you've got to find the middle ground. Don't make it too complicated, but don't make them too simple that the information that you gather is not useful. The key thing, I think, is giving them back. So giving them information back, giving the staff, fill in timesheets, information about what they've been filling. So for instance, providing managers reports about their projects. So every month, every 6 months, say, you spend this number of days on your project, and you had budgeted for. So you spent 20 days on your project already. You budgeted for only 30 days. You've got 3 more months to go. Keep an eye on that. That's useful information. So if you can report back quickly useful information, then people will be more likely to fill in these timesheets because they feel that there's something that's going to help them. You can also, you can have simple timesheets. You don't have to have them too complicated. It can be an Excel spreadsheet. That's not a problem. You can also gather information using samples. You can go around, maybe work with one program or one project, gather information about the use of their time. See it as a way of monitoring how the organization is going, using samples, for example. You could start with some of the parts of the organization that are easier, where staff will find it easier to fill in timesheets. Maybe in administrative roles where they're doing some things the same every day. You can start with senior management so that they show their staff or output it, and you're going to have to do it as well. So the ways to introduce this, my advice would be don't go don't make them too complicated, don't make them too long, unless you're going to be able to report back everything you collected. Because if you don't, then staff's going to say, what is this for? You were using them, but this doesn't help me. And that's a fair point.
Anybody has a view or experience on monitoring or management?
How is your office? UNICEF perhaps, UNICEF is that no, that
It's a little bit different.
yes.
It's quite encompassing, but we're not a think tank like you, so it's a huge organizational structure, and it's implemented rather similarly from the international level down to the regional and the country offices. So for M&E, it goes in the well, for our when it goes into the reporting structure, but we don't have timesheets for specific research assignments or anything. That goes with our partnerships or PCAs with institutions like SMERU. I don't know, Nick, if you have anything else to add.
There are two levels of monitoring: outcome and output. Outcome you rely on the consultant or another institutions, or output we did on the side, and there is the role in the office who work. That's the cross-cutting role.
Yeah.
So we have some cluster, sectoral cluster. So the role of monitoring is they work all cluster. They work with cluster and trying to integrate.
I think the key thing is that some organizations have separate monitoring and evaluation officers. They sort of hire, especially if they get a funder, and hire somebody typically to look at monitoring and evaluation, because there's a lot of pressure to do monitoring and evaluation, especially with outcomes. I think that's okay in a way. Those people can help set up a system. But really, good monitoring is about good management. If you're a good manager, or you have a good management system, your system will collect the information you need to know that you're doing the right things, and that you're working in the right direction. You don't need to have a whole separate thing, where you have to fill in separate forms and write separate reports. So your monitoring reports should be the same management report. So whatever it is that I, as a researcher, give my boss, that should be part of the monitoring. My boss should use that information to pass it on to the senior manager, and the senior management has to prepare something for the executive director. That should be also part of the monitoring. It should be separate, because otherwise, you are creating more work for yourself. So a good governance structure, good management will make monitoring easy, because information flow easily. You know where things are, what's going on. It is part of, I think it is part of the governance and management discussion. And it's part of that, particularly because I'm talking about the inputs and outputs part of the organization. My view is that let the funders worry about the outcomes of the and so think tanks can plan thinking about their outcomes, but they shouldn't be evaluated against those outcomes. So those outcomes are beyond your control. The policymaker or politician deciding to use your research, that's up to them. You have no influence over that. You have no influence over the president or the minister. So you shouldn't be judged against them using your work. Plan with that in mind, that is not appropriate to evaluate it. Let the funders decide whether you are influential or not. If they don't think you're influential, then they will not give you money. If they give you money, it should be because they think you're influential. Otherwise, they're not doing their job. It's like if I'm an investor and I go and I give money to a company, and then they lose money, and they say, oh, I thought you were a good investor. I should have checked whatever you invested. It's my responsibility to check. So I think think tanks should be focusing on inputs and outputs a lot in terms of monitoring and evaluation. And the funders should worry about the outcomes. Okay, not very confident. I think that's all I have on that if you would like to discuss with us. Does anybody here have more general comment or anything else related to the discussion so far today? Please, like based on your experience in managing your presentations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we had an experience that make the government very angry to us. But it's about. I want to ask you about the difference between think tank in developing countries like us and also in advanced countries. I mean, because in here sometimes to influence policy, to change the policy, we not only need rational thinking, data, or many things, but also pressure, like several law that it was happen because of like about social security, about law about village. So that's need a pressure. Then the government and parliament consider. I think it's rather different if we compare with advanced country. So I need your comment that because of the citizens are quite aware about something, and then they are more rational. So data and many things really important. But in here, we need also some pressure also. So that is what also we do. That we are not only make research, but also we engage with civil society. We also make public awareness to get support. And also, of course, we also engage with the policymaker also. So we need more effort to do something to influence.
Yeah, so there are many things there. One thing about influence is that you do not need research to influence, or good research to influence. So a lot of time I talk to think tanks and I say, okay, first thing we need to influence is good research. You don't. You can influence without good research. You can influence without research. In fact, it's probably easier to influence without worrying about the research. Right? Because the research makes it difficult for you to do whatever you want to do. Right? The research tells you this is true, this is false. Right? So you're stuck. You have to argue something in the truth. If you don't look at research, you can make up your mind later on and you can influence whatever you want. So think tanks and policy research institutes choose to influence using research as a basis of their arguments, as one of the things they use to build their argument. But they also use values. They have to use people because science research doesn't tell you what to do; it just tells you what is. Research tells me that there are people in Jakarta whose houses flood every time it rains. It doesn't say I must do something. My values tell me I must do something about it. So the poverty map tells you where poor are and where the rich are. It doesn't tell me what to do, or that I must do something about it. It's my value. My values tell me I must help the poor. Right? I could also say I must help the poor, but by helping the rich first, because money will trickle down. Others would say, no, I must go directly to the poor because trickling down is hard. Those are values. That's not the reason. That's important. The second thing is that, of course, to influence, you need other things. You need good argument, and the good argument comes from different sources, not just research. You need pressure, you need networks, you need coalitions, you need to be in the media, etc. But a think tank cannot do all of that. So again, going back to the point of monitoring outputs or outputs, you can control up to outputs. You can say, as a think tank or as my organization, all I can do is research. I can publish my research, I can organize events, I can network, I can talk to the media, I can try to train the media, I can try to educate the media, I could organize private meetings with policymakers. So all the things I can do. Now, whether these things then lead to change, it's not my responsibility, right? You know, all I can do is I can try to do the things that I think will lead to change, right? And I'll try to do them the best I can. But then it's not me who is going to sign legislation or petition parliament. That's somebody else will do it. The NGOs. I'm not going to organize a protest. I think that's what I do. If I wanted to do that, I'd become a social movement. I'm not gonna draft legislation. That's what a parliamentary committee does. Maybe a lobbying agent does. I'm not gonna invite members of parliament to a cocktail, to convince them to sign a piece. That's what a lobbying firm does. You might need to work with them. You might need to be aware of them. But I think we need to clarify where the boundary of the organization. In developed countries, that you were asking, I think it's the same. It's just that it's messier in our countries. More of a mess in Indonesia or in Peru, where I live. In Peru, it takes me longer to figure out what's going on because the boundaries are blurred between politics and academia, between academia and think tanks and business. They're too blurry because these institutions are not strong. So it's unclear where media starts or ends, and where political parties start. But in the UK, it happens. It's the same way. It's just that it's clearer. It's easier to see who is doing what and why. And I think a key difference is that I can go to the UK and pick up 4 or 5 newspapers or magazines and deal with the politics and describe it in such great detail that I understand more or less who is involved and who's doing what. But in Peru, I don't know in Indonesia, but in Peru certainly, the media is such poor quality that it's impossible to know really how things are done and what's going on. So for a think tank, it looks like nothing will happen. Right? It looks like it's a mess. It's just because we don't have that information. We have enough information about it. But don't think that nobody's more rational. I think we're all equally irrational. It's just that some have more information than others. But even with information, people decide things based on gut feelings and on values and on beliefs, even if the data says the opposite. And that's fine. We're human beings, right? We're no robots, we're no computers. I think sometimes researchers, there's a comment nothing to do with it, but sometimes researchers get really upset and think, oh, the evidence, they're making a decision against evidence. That's bad, terrible. But we've got to remember that sometimes issues are not about evidence, they're about values. Some issues are about the values of society. We might disagree with those values, but it doesn't mean that people making decisions don't want to look at the evidence. It's just that they can't do anything with it because their value system says, no, I can't do that. Reproductive rights is one issue. In some cases, you might argue the evidence says that sure, but maybe okay, maybe in France, but not in Britain. It's not an issue just about evidence. It's about values, and that's okay. I'm comfortable with that.
I have one last question for you. You mentioned about values. How do you institutionalize that into an organization, especially with small think tanks, and whether that gets to instill that organization? I mean, sometimes it's the big ideas or vision. Sometimes it comes down to the one single expert.
Yeah.
That expert leaves or commit to a full time, whatever it is. the values or vision might just about for it, how to make sure that it stays there in the institution and not just stays at the head of that.
Well, I mean, again, governance, having a board that represents these values, having 9 management structures which allow information to flow quickly, having not just staff meetings but also senior management meetings or staff meetings to share ideas, share information constantly. So if somebody leaves, at least their ideas have been shared before they left. There are tools like intranets and staff meetings and events that you can use to share ideas. Values, I think it's about being explicit about them. I think many organizations, were saying before, aren't explicit about the values. Well, they confuse values with, I guess they are values, but it's about participation, being inclusive. Everybody is inclusive, everybody is pro-poor. Nobody is ever anti-poor. That's not what I mean. I mean more, let's say, your definition of justice. The role of the individual in society. Where you stand, those things. Being explicit is a very good way of ensuring that who comes next, those values won't be lost. I think that especially when funding comes from outside of the country, it's the responsibility and the unity of think tanks in the country to discuss these things and then try to educate their funders so that their funders from outside of the country are more comfortable about discussion about values. Because they tend to think that if you're funding think tanks, it's because we're funding merits, funding science, we're not funding values. But we're human beings. We all have values. Even the idea of evidence-based policy is a value. It's suggesting that this type of policy making is better than other types of policy making. So that's a value. That's a value. There's no evidence that says that policies based on evidence are always better. Probably are. I don't know, but it's a value. So it's about educating your donors sometimes. When you fund stuff from outside, you have an extra challenge because they don't know your context. They don't. Also, they don't speak the language. Right? They're consultants who come to evaluate you need translators. If you came to Peru and I showed you around, you get a lot, but you struggle because you wouldn't understand the other conversations that are going on. You wouldn't know about the sort of formal relationships and the things that are hidden, which actually are more important than the things we see. So it's important that we remember that they need something to be educated to understand that there are values. The best way is to show them that their own think tanks in their own countries are explicit about their rights. So what should we do?
You just mentioned that in monitoring management, we should just worry about monitoring the input and output. But between the two, which one is, I think, more effective in telling, in really judging the effectiveness of the management?
I think you need both. I think you need to know, how much money you're spending and doing what, right? And you need to know that, I spend, $10,000 producing a paper, and that's the best I can do. The paper is highest quality and it's cheapest. You need to monitor both. I don't mean don't keep an eye on outcomes. Don't forget that. It's just that don't judge yourselves against achieving those outcomes because they are beyond your control. Even if a policymaker uses your research, quotes your research, and then says, and then this comes out of a conversation I had with a SMERU researcher, that's still not you who can claim the influence. It's them who decided to use your research. Right? Because they could have very easily said, I met this SMERU researcher, I had a conversation with him, but I choose to do something. Right? Or they could have met somebody else. There might have been another researcher in the and you should have done the same type of work. It just didn't happen to be there at the time. It's too luck. But you can't claim that, right? I don't think you can. But you can tell me if I was a finalist, tell me that I received 100 and I used this 100 to deliver these outputs, these activities that are of the best quality possible, and they're cheap. I actually saved money and I was able to do more than I had planned, and I was quick, I was efficient, took care of my staff. It's about how the organization works, and that's a working properly.
Masih ada lagi? I think if not, we should end our discussion today. I'm very glad that today we discussed issue of governance and management of the think tank. These things usually just discussed internally in our organization. At most we discuss this with reviewers, not in public settings. So I hope this will become a kind of an initial sharing platform on managing these things. Because as you said earlier, that in the end, this governance and management is fully determined whether an organization, a think tank, will continue to live on forever or actually die off. So thank you for your active participation in our discussion today. With this, let's close discussion with an applause.
I just want to say, I prepared yesterday a very long document, and I'm going to update it with your feedback you gave me today. I'm happy to give you some cards, and if you have any more feedback and you maybe didn't want to give it now, but you want to email me, please do. And in the next couple of weeks, I'll put this series of blogs together and publish them, so you have everything we talked about today published online with lots of links. That's what I would.
And Udoni will announce it when it's about the blog.
Yes.
Formally, we have ended our discussion, but let's continue our discussion informally while having lunch with the society. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.